Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is the 16th of June 2021, and these are the stories that we will be talking about and discussing during the course of the show. We will begin with the follow-up on the mob attack on a Muslim man in India, in Ghaziabad, in fact, and of course the increase in Hindutva and the attacks on minorities. What has happened of late is that the Ghaziabad police has lodged an FIR, not only against people but also against journalists, against Twitter, and against Congress leaders for tweets on the elderly man's assault. Where does that take the security of people? Where does that take the freedom of the so-called largest democracy in the world, and of course the freedom that journalists have, or even social media platforms like Twitter have? A lot of question marks emanate following what has happened in Ghaziabad, and we will be discussing that in our very first story. Then we will be discussing on what to oversee once the US and the NATO troops withdraw from Afghanistan. Is that going to go forward as an increase in refugees in different other countries of the neighborhood of Afghanistan? Just like Pakistan, we know we are housing millions of Afghan refugees since decades. Will that cause an influx of further refugees from Afghanistan because of the unrest that exists in Afghanistan? We'll be discussing that as our second segment. Then we will be talking about Israel that has carried out airstrikes against Hamas militant targets in Gaza. It says in retaliation for incendiary balloons that were launched from the territory. Then there have been protests by the ultra-nationalist Israelis, and as a result also by the Palestinians, who have been chanting slogans against each other. Just a few days of calm before the storm rose again. Then we will be talking about deposed Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi, who has gone on trial for sedition in a junta court on Tuesday, that is yesterday, more than 4 months after her government was ousted in a coup that has thrown her country into turmoil. We will be talking about the updates as far as that is concerned. And finally, we'll be talking about, for the first time in the history of Para Chinar, Maria, who's a Christian woman. She's been recruited as a teacher in Pakistan's Kurram district of the Khyber tribal districts. She says that her appointment has made the Muslims in her area happier than her community and her relatives. Let's begin with our first segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the follow-up on the attack on an elderly man in Ghaziabad. Police have launched an FIR not only against Congress leaders but also against Twitter, also against journalists. More in the following report.
The filing of FIR against Twitter, Congress leaders and journalists by Ghaziabad Indian police has a significance that goes beyond the hounding of two prominent journalists, Mohammad Zubair and Rana Ayub. It may well be a foretaste of what the Hindu nationalist BJP government has in store for those who stand up against communal violence or seek to expose malpractices within the social, political, corporate and personal spaces. The elaborate police charge sheet against journalists who posted threads regarding a video featuring elderly Muslim man beaten by Hindu mob depicts that crackdown and incarcerations against journalists in systematic attempt of totalitarian control of information. The cancellation of registration of hundreds of thousands of independent media outlets and civil rights organizations indicates India's persistent descent into darkness. Undoubtedly, these fresh FIRs surfaced at the time when journalism in India is under tremendous strain and silencing press is covert government strategy to hide their majoritarian terrorism. The World Press Freedom Index 2021, published by Reporters Without Borders, has placed India at the 142nd position after it had consistently slid down from 133 in 2016. According to Reporters Without Borders, journalists are exposed to every kind of attack in Modi's India, including police violence against reporters, ambushes by political activists, and reprisals instigated by criminal groups or corrupt local officials. As BJP government tightened its grip over media, an environment of intimidation has been created by BJP supporters for any critical journalists who are labelled as anti-state or anti-nation. The capture and control of press illustrates that BJP is at war with free press, but independent journalists are determined to resist.
To discuss the follow-up of what happened to Abdul Samad Saifi in Ghaziabad and of course the FIRs that have been lodged against the Congress leaders, against the journalists and against Twitter. We've been joined by Bilal Zubair, but he's a political analyst and a visiting faculty at the Quaid-e-Azam University and the National Defense University. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us. What do you make of all of this? Is India no longer a free state? Can we call that publicly?
Thank you, Osama. What we see is a series of very tough stance towards the social media activists and social media platforms in India for quite some time now. And we should remind ourselves that India is in amidst of a social, political, and economic crisis since the BJP has raised to the power corridors in India. So what we can make of all this hardline narrative that has been in India for quite some time is that India is the BJP government-led India is quite strict towards the dissent. Either it is coming from the political parties, either it is coming from the media activists, either it is coming from the social media platforms.
All right, now Bilal Zubair, but when you see all the different FIRs that have been lodged against these different entities, whether it be the IPC sections 153, provocation for rioting, 153A, promoting enmity between different groups, 295A, acts intended to outrage religious feelings, 505, mischief, 120B, criminal conspiracy, 34, common intention, and others. What do you make of it all? Is the Indian government or the Indian authorities so afraid of people that call out the truth of what happens in their country that they are forced to silence them one way or the other?
Well, we know that the international community is pretty much critical of how the India is behaving internally and how it is doing these crackdowns on the social media activists in India alongside the journalists and the opposition parties. In the recent times, we have seen that there are social media mobilization against Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We have seen the 2020-21 farmer movement that the government was harshly criticized by the opposition parties and the social media, including the academia and social media activists and the lawyers and the other segments of the society. Similarly, the mismanagement in the recent pandemic has caused the highest death toll globally, and India has been pretty much criticized of its handling of the pandemic. So, and simultaneously,
are these face-saving tactics, in your point of view, Bilal Sahab, are these face-saving tactics by the Indian government?
They are definitely face-saving tactics by the Indian government. They want to quiet and silence the dissent that is emerging. There are more than 500 million social media users in India, and as the growing voices, the widespread voices that are criticizing the Indian government for its actions have been going global, I would say the Indian government has been severely criticized by the human rights bodies, by the celebrities, by the people of influence from across the world. Yes, this is a pretty much evident case of silencing the voices of the opposition.
Bilal Sahab, can all of these measures that have been taken by the government be taken as part of a democratic principle or norms of any country that calls itself the largest democracy in the world?
Definitely not. Definitely not. India being a democracy, one should expect that democracy should be more transparent, should be more acceptable towards the criticism, towards the voices of dissent. But what we have seen in India with the rise of the right-wing Hindutva ideology and the rise of Narendra Modi's Modiism, what we have seen is that India has been contrary to what it has professed for over 70 years, that is a secular democracy. It believes in human rights, it believes in the fundamental rights of all the individual irrespective of caste, creed and color. India has been doing what contrary to what it has been enshrined in the Constitution of India.
The curbing of the human rights, Bilal Saab, as we've seen examples of in the last few months and years, is this a constant process that India is going through under the BJP government? Is this a process that will continue till such time that all voices of reason will be shut down or silenced?
So what we have seen is that a majoritarian India that is depicted by the true face of India, that is depicted by the BJP-led Indian government. And I don't see a reversal in this process, because to garner the support of the majority of the vote bank that the BJP has, that comes from this hardline discourse and narrative that they have created over a period of time, I don't see a reversal in this process, because it would help BJP to come and retain its power footprints.
All right. What about the social media outlets and the companies that are, of course, working from within India, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Twitter, that has been put under, this FIR, and the scope of FIRs that the Ghaziabad police have implicated Twitter as well as the journalists under. Do you feel that the social media platforms have also lost their right to freedom?
Indeed, I would say that social media platforms that should have been the voice of the ordinary Indians as an intermediary, they are just showing the true face of a nation or whatever material people wants to share on the media. Now, what is happening over the period of time, that the media that is known as the Godi media in India has been curbed, has been totally grasped by the state, by the government. So social media was the only platforms that were available for the Indians to freely express what they think about their government. And recently, what we have seen, that the toolkits that were created by the Congress party to expose the Narendra Modi's irresponsible behavior towards controlling the pandemic from 2020 onwards has been severely criticized on the social media. It created a trend that was globally followed by the activists across the world, and that was bringing such a bad name to the Indian government. Similarly, what we have seen is that the farmer protest was also criticized globally, and this is a reminder of the fact that India has slided from its position of 27 to 36.
And of course, Bilal, there's also the cow vigilantes. There are also all those Muslims and Christians that have been persecuted, A, for eating beef, B, for going forward with their old religious practices. They are being told to change their religion, forced to change their religions one way or the other. We have seen this example of Abdul Samad Saifi Saab as well, who was told to chant Jai Shri Ram, and his beard was trimmed or cut. Is this a lone incident? Because we have seen that there are a spate of such incidents that have been occurring in India since the last couple of years. Will there be an increase in this number of such incidents now that the police have also gotten involved and FIRs are being lodged against people who are trying to voice some concern against this practice?
So what we see is that there is this chain reaction which is not abating in the coming years. And the reason is that it has been happening under the state patronage. The state that is the people who are doing such activities are not being arrested and persecuted. Rather, those people who are showing the true face of this behavior by the right-wing nationalist activists, and they are supported by the Indian government with the police patronage. This is something that is shameless, and it is likely that such a behavior would not, we won't see a reversal of such a behavior in India.
No reaction from the champions of human rights, the countries in the West that call themselves the hallmarks as far as democratic principles are concerned and human rights principles are concerned. We see no reaction coming or emanating from their end. Why?
Yeah, but we see that this is a time of geoeconomics, and India is a very important player as far as these countries are concerned. India has recently called the G7 summit by the head of the governments, and what we see is that there is a sort of a political expediency that We saw on the part of the Western governments, including the United States of America, they want India to be a important player in this war against so-called war against the rise of China. So I see it as a matter of political expediency and economic expediency, and we won't see any serious concerns being raised by the Western governments in this regard.
And finally, Bilal Saab, seeing these FIRs that are being lodged against the journalists who are giving some kind of a scene element to what is happening in India, or to the social media outlets where they are posting such comments, or to other people, do you feel that the government is slowly and steadily putting a legal cover to all the atrocities, whether it be human rights abuses or others, so that whatever it does now and in the future can be backed up by the judiciary and the police?
So what we have seen in the case of Article 370 and 51A, that the judiciary has been more tilted towards the government decisions, and I do see that the judiciary would make or would be more inclined towards more populist decisions, and in this case, no relief would be given to these activists and to the social media platforms in this regard.
Thank you very much, Bilal. Zubair Batsa, political analyst, joining us and giving us his point of view and opinion about what is happening in India, and of course the sane voices that are now being silenced one way or the other, this time through lodging of FIRs against them, and also social media outlets such as Twitter. We'll be updating you as and when further updates come that way. Let's go to our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns what is the future of the Afghan peace process. Once the withdrawal of the US and NATO forces happen, the United Nations fears that there are going to be more refugees, an influx of refugees in neighboring countries. More in the following report.
The incumbent US President Joe Biden has announced that all US troops in Afghanistan will be withdrawn by 11th of September 2021 after more than 20 years of US involvement in the country's war. The most important aspect of this withdrawal is that it is not conditions-based. Hence, the withdrawal comes with major risk. Afghanistan could descend into another bloody round of war, and the ongoing inter-Afghan peace process between the Taliban and the Afghan government could collapse. Pakistan has always advocated for Afghan-led, Afghan own peace process by emphasizing that Afghan cauldron represents a shared responsibility, and responsibility for deterioration of peace rests upon all stakeholders. As Afghan leadership and fighting groups are reluctant to show flexibility, the perpetuation of violence would probably prompt unprecedented displacement of civilians. The massive exodus of Afghan refugees in Pakistan might open door for TTP and other miscreants to infiltrate Pakistan and foment insurgency. Pakistan has already borne the brunt of Afghan war and suffered and paid a huge price in form of lives lost, soldiers martyred, mosques bombed, and loss to the economy. Sensing the gravity of situation, former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton reiterated that it is important to protect the many thousands of Afghans who had worked with the US and NATO during the conflict. United Nations is also reportedly doing contingency planning for huge displacement of Afghan nationals. There are currently approximately 2.5 million registered refugees from Afghanistan globally, while another 4.8 million have been displaced within the country, according to UN Refugee Agency UNHCR. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken asserted that Pakistan has no interest in the Afghanistan winding up in a civil war because that would produce a massive refugee flow to Pakistan. Hence, a strenuous test for Pakistan has already begun.
Now, to talk more about the future of the refugee crisis from Afghanistan and how Afghan peace process seems to go forward or not, we've been joined by Syed Ali Zia Jaffery. He's a research associate at the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research at the University of Lahore. Thank you very much, Syed Ali, to have joined us. Now, when you see a report coming from the UN Refugee Chief Filippo Grandi on Monday, who talks about his apprehensions as far as the refugee influx in other neighboring countries following the US and NATO troop withdrawal is concerned, should the neighboring countries and should the Afghan nationals be worried?
Thank you very much. It's a very important topic for discussion. I think, yes, it is a cause of worry, and the worry emanates from the ongoing situation in Afghanistan. Let me give you an example. The Americans have given the Afghan theater on a platter to the Taliban by signing the Doha deal in 2020. And now the Taliban are capturing district after district every day. So, that has raised the prospect of a civil war, and a brutal one at that. So obviously it is not something reasonable to expect that refugees would not be hurt. We will see an influx of refugees in Pakistan, adding to our difficulties and troubles that we already have in managing the. According to some reports, there are 3 million Afghan refugees, legal and illegal both. So I think this is a big problem and a big cause of concern. And the cause of concern is all the more, difficult and strenuous because the international community does not have the appetite, or I would say the capacity, to help the refugees in their hour of need.
Though,
We
if
can
they do
bring.
not have the appetite to deal with the refugee crisis, then shouldn't the international community come together to deal with this issue before it escalates further?
This is what the UN Secretary General said when he attended the conference on refugees in Islamabad before the COVID started. They should come, but a lot of things should have been done, but they've not been done, especially in relation to Afghanistan. So I am not that optimistic as far as the international community playing a lead role in reshaping the destiny of these hapless refugees. I don't see them coming, and I see
So what
more
happens
pressure
with the
being
destiny of
exerted
these
on this.
hapless Afghan refugees? There are officially 2.5 million refugees globally. There are officially 4.8 million displaced within the country. That number is going to increase significantly. The official number, I'm not even touching the unofficial number. The official number is going to increase exponentially once this crisis escalates. How will the countries such as the United States of America or organizations such as the United Nations deal with such crises then?
United States is leaving Afghanistan as a bad job. I don't see them. I don't see it playing a great role in all this. So, well,
But
that's
it
it. And
has
the
given
UN.
around 266 million US dollars in new humanitarian aid, which brings about the total humanitarian aid to 3.9 billion. Such aid that has started since
Frankly,
2002.
think
Do
that
you
the
feel the
aid.
US will continue to help monetarily Afghanistan with its refugee crisis, or do you feel it's going to sideline itself from that as well?
No, it may continue with its piecemeal efforts to help the refugees, but when a civil war is ongoing, the the focus would be on, quote unquote, stopping the Taliban, whom they have actually given Afghanistan on a golden platter, as I said earlier. So I don't think that that helping the refugees is on their priority list as we speak, because they are already looking at stopping the Taliban from taking over. They recently they said that we might launch airstrikes from various places
But
through our
this
over-the-horizon
seems
capabilities.
kind of very strange because Ali, to be very frank, wasn't the deal signed between the Afghan Taliban and the US?
But that has not. That's look. That is the problem. They have signed a deal with the Afghan Taliban, giving them carte blanche over Afghanistan. But now they are, at the same time, they're trying to, quote unquote, help the Afghan National Security Forces deal with the Taliban. So, there is this hypocrisy and an organized one at that, where you see that at one side you're helping the Taliban, you've strengthened the Taliban, at the other side you're trying to strengthen the opponents of the Taliban. So this is where the dichotomy lies, and this is what the Americans have done in Afghanistan during this Afghan peace process. They've not. They signed a deal, an exit deal, a withdrawal deal. That was not a peace deal. So we have to dissociate a peace deal from a withdrawal deal, and this is
All
where
right.
where
Where,
where
where,
Pakistan
Ali,
is
does
concerned.
that leave countries and their roles, such as Turkey, that has said that it wants to play an active role as far as the future of the Afghan peace process is concerned? Pakistan, that has always played a very important role, whether it be housing the millions of Afghan refugees or working towards an Afghan-owned and Afghan-led peace process, whether it be the Central Asian states, whether it be Iran, whether it be other countries in the region. How do you see their role in maybe trying to de-escalate this tension?
Yes, I think Pakistan has been very vociferous and very clear about what it wants to do. It has replied to America's "do more" demand, which is now again surfaced, uh, with uh, with with the "we have done enough" mantra. We have said that we had a role. We assiduously played that role, and now the onus lies on the Afghan leadership and other stakeholders in Afghanistan. The other day, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, our foreign minister, made a very blunt statement where he said that Pakistan would not take responsibility should things go south. And he also mentioned, let me be very clear about this, he also mentioned that Pakistan would should not be blamed until and unless all our Afghan brothers and sisters return to Afghanistan in a dignified manner. If something happens after the return of Afghan refugees to Afghanistan, then Pakistan should be approached, and then Pakistan could really help in stemming the flow of so-called cross border miscreants or so. So
All right, now talking of cross-border miscreants is a very important point, Ali. Do you feel that spoilers such as India, with the aid of the TTP or the IS, will take advantage of this refugee crisis to further destabilize countries such as Pakistan?
TTP thrives on people living inside Pakistan. These refugees living inside Pakistan would provide an ideal opportunity for the TTP to, complete the circle of the resurgence that has been witnessed of late, and elements within the Afghan refugees could prove to be veritable sleeper cells of the TTP, and that could give them a great deal of leverage in re-entering Pakistan after they were flushed out in a military operation in 2014, 15, 16. So I think we need to understand. I wrote an article recently, yesterday, on this, and this is something very, very critical. One of the reasons as to why Pakistan wants peace and stability in Afghanistan is that if there is ruckus and mayhem in Afghanistan, the TTP would gain further footings in Afghanistan. It would the ground would become more fertile for them, for it to you know increase its subversive activities against Pakistan. And one point I want to make: the things could become easier for the TTP, given the fact that erstwhile FATA, which is now undergoing great development after its merger, look, the TTP can again target those areas, and it can achieve greater success by targeting its former fiefdom. And this is where I think the immediate worry for Pakistan is, and Pakistan needs to take stock of the situation.
Of course, but Ali, to be very frank, I think Pakistani organizations that are concerned with it, whether it be our forces or our intelligentsia, already know the repercussions of such a refugee crisis, and they are already working, I'm sure, with the mechanisms in order to curtail the further influx of TTP or even the influx of the Indian influence as a spoiler in Pakistan. And we've seen so much of that in the past, and we've also seen how our forces and our intelligentsia have very carefully and methodically curtailed such elements. So of course this does pose an additional responsibility for Pakistan. Which is the country, final question, which is the country that you feel is going to play the most important role now that the US and NATO are withdrawing, and with this refugee crisis that is slowly and steadily coming up, and of course will be engulfing the neighborhood countries as well?
I think Turkey has the propensity and the willingness to help, but then again, Turkey's relations with the US are not that free of fissures. So I think that would really be an impediment in Turkey playing a greater role. Although Turkey has taken steps to offer its good offices to bring these Afghan parties together, and Pakistan has also been part of those parleys. I think Turkey can help, but I would be very despondent in saying this, that once a brutal civil war is ongoing in Afghanistan, there's only so much that any country could do, because the country that was in this very land for 19 or 20 years, it is going without doing anything to stabilize Afghanistan. And let me be very frank about it. The Americans are again, in their official enunciations, are again saying that Pakistan has a special role to play in stabilizing Afghanistan. they're also saying that Pakistan has the required leverage over the Taliban to alter its behavior. This is not the case. Pakistan has long dissociated itself from being the linchpin of the Taliban, and this is something
Of
that the
course.
Americans need to
And
understand.
it is high time that countries such as the United States of America understand this and realize this and move forward in a fashion that bodes well not only for Pakistan but also for Afghanistan, where it has stayed for around 19 or so years. Syed Ali Zia Jaffery Saab, thank you very much to have joined us and to have opened us about this huge crisis that is slowly and steadily becoming more of a realization and more of a reality. Let's see how that happens in the months to come, whether the important countries and organizations are able to curtail it to some extent. Finally, our news stories, very quick recap of those. Israel has targeted Gaza sites again after just a couple of days of peace. That peace deal that was signed between Hamas and Israel has now no longer a peace deal, because we've seen that the Israel has airstrikes have targeted Gaza sites, and they say this is after this shaky ceasefire that happened for after 11 days of violence last month. They say it is as a reaction to some balloons that were launched by Hamas. At the same time, what happened just a day before was that on Tuesday, hundreds of Israeli ultra-nationalists, some chanting even slogans such as "Death to Arabs," paraded in East Jerusalem in a show of force that threatened to spark renewed violence. And of course, Palestinians in Gaza responded. They launched incendiary balloons that caused at least 10 fires in southern Israel. Now let's go towards our next segment, and that concerns Aung San Suu Kyi, and of course the leader who has been put under arrest following coup that happened a couple of months back that threw her country into turmoil. She has gone on trial for sedition in a junta court on Tuesday. Many statements are emanating in her favor, others not in her favor. But of course, let's see how all of this develops. It's also a developing story, but nevertheless, the junta has taken over Aung San Suu Kyi's country, that is Myanmar, and she is undergoing a trial for sedition. Whether she is actually convicted for sedition, only time will tell. And then our final story, ladies and gentlemen, that concerns Para Chinar in Pakistan, where in the first Christian lady who's known as Maria has been recruited as a teacher in Pakistan's Kurram district, and she says that her appointment has made the locals of this area even more overjoyed than her compatriots who were Christians in that area and her relatives. She always wanted to study, and that is what her parents made her do. She did her master's, and now she is a teacher, and of course she is a symbol for all of those minorities in Pakistan and across the globe that give you that hope that where there is a will, there is always a way, and when you want to achieve something, when you have the passion to achieve something, you always achieve that. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow. New segments, new stories. Take care of yourselves, get yourselves vaccinated, and follow the SOPs. Allah Hafiz.